So what is a cesarean trap? It's just what it sounds like. It's a trap. It's a trap that leads you into getting a C-section that you had thought that you were avoiding, but because you fell into one of these traps, unfortunately, that was your outcome. Basically, you think you're playing one game and you're following all of the rules for that game. However, unfortunately, you took the rule book from the wrong game. You chose to have a natural birth. You think you're playing the natural birth game. And somebody gave you the actual rules to end up in a C-section. But they said that it was a natural birth rule book. This is why a lot of the time, if you're following the typical mainstream mom advice, you end up falling into that trap. So if you're paying attention to this video, what this is going to do, and this is why you need to watch this, is it's going to help you avoid a cesarean. It's going to help you avoid an induction. It's going to help you avoid pain. It's going to help you avoid trauma in your birth. And you're going to be able to stay confident, and you're going to be able to have a beautiful natural birth that you're envisioning. And you're going to be able to experience that power in your body. And you're going to do it with less pain, less fear, and without crumbling under the pressure. That's what I'm going to be giving you today. So now you're probably wondering how exactly this is all possible. How is it that this is actually going to work for you? The truth is that I discovered a system. I call it the 5 pillars of empowerment. And if you've been following me for a while, then you know that it's the right mindset, the right education, the right environment, the right facilitators, and the right support. And if you're brand new to me, then I'm just going to give you a very quick backstory. My name is Carly Bonderud. I'm a childbirth educator. I am a doula, and I am an empowerment coach. So what I do is I help moms who have otherwise had traumatic birth experiences or disappointing birth experiences, or those who really want to have the natural birth without being poked, without being prodded, without being pushed into interventions, without feeling like they have to compromise on their birth plan. And I show them the map on how they can actually get what they want. Because the truth is that when I was a first-time mom, I thought I was doing all of the things. I thought I was following the right map. I was reading all the books. I was taking all the birth classes. I hired a midwife. I hired a doula. And in the end, at 35 weeks, my midwife told me, you're measuring too small. We're probably going to have to induce you, and we're probably going to have to do a C-section because your baby's not growing. Now, I'm a very stubborn person, and I had this mindset that unless it was a true emergency, if they're not doing anything right away, if they're trying to schedule this weeks in advance and they're trying to lead me down this path, obviously there's nothing wrong yet. I call it could, might, possibly, maybe happen. So I was like, no, I'm not doing that. Until you can give me concrete evidence that my baby is actually too small and that he's not growing at all, and that he's really going to be stressed out if I go into natural labor by myself, I'm not inducing. However, I will take this non-stress test, and I will come in and do ultrasounds just to prove you wrong. Just to prove that I can still do this, I'm going to just keep doing this. But my friends and family around me were absolutely terrified. And because I was a small person, they really did believe that my baby was too small. Now, spoiler alert, my baby's come out 8 pounds. My son came at 41 weeks on his, just a week after his due date. And my daughter came 3 days after her due date. And they were both the same size and the same head circumference. And I had natural births with both of them. But it wasn't without having to fight, beg, and compromise with my first birth that I learned that a lot of what you're learning in maternity care and in childbirth education is setting you up to fail. And the reason for that is simple. Our society has gotten into this culture of fear. And our society has basically said that your body is broken and defective and needs medical help, and that birth is a medical event. It's not, it's a physiological event. So I identified these traps, and as working as a doula over the last several years, I was really thinking, you know what? I'm going to have my home birth. I got tricked out of it with my first baby. I was told I wasn't allowed to birth at home. And because I was told I wasn't allowed, I believed them. And I later found out that I could have birthed at home, and that if I had known how to say certain things to people, that I probably could have just stayed home and they would have had to come to me. But I didn't know what I didn't know. And if you didn't know something and you're now looking, it's like, wait a minute, I got tricked, I fell into a trap. I'm just going to let you know that it's okay. You're right where you need to be, and we can get you out of it. In fact, my book, Your Empowered Birth, which you can get at my website, empoweringmomsbirth.com/book, will actually give you the full roadmap that you need. And it's a complimentary ebook that you will be able to download immediately. You just put your name and email in. And then what happens is that you will get the email in your inbox with the link to download that book. And then you'll be able to go through it and you'll get the entire system. So again, that's empoweringmomsbirth.com/book. But today we're going to be talking about the big three, the biggest cesarean traps that I have found that led me onto this empowered birth journey to becoming a doula, a childbirth educator, and an empowerment coach, and helping women avoid these traps. So if you have been watching the Cesarean Traps series and you've been getting all this information, I just want you to know that these are the most important ones that you are going to want to pay attention to. If you remember anything else from the 21 traps that I have listed over the last several weeks, these are the big three. So what are the big three? Well, the first one is induction. Induction is the worst one that you could possibly fall into, and it is the reason that a lot of moms end up having a C-section. Here is how it typically goes. Okay, so with induction, you are automatically no longer having a physiological birth. When you interfere with the physiological birth process, your body is being hijacked. Your hormones are being hijacked. Your body is no longer making the necessary hormones to keep labor progressing, and your body is no longer making the necessary hormones to allow you to have less pain in your birth, to be able to get into that labor trance. As soon as you induce, physiological birth is gone. You are no longer having it. You are having a medically managed birth. And oftentimes, if you fall into the induction trap and you agree to that induction because maybe your care provider is saying you're 39 weeks and we believe that 39 weeks is safer to induce. I do have a video where I talk about the 39-week myth, or they say that your baby is past their due date. This is another trap. Or they say that you're not showing signs of labor progress, or maybe you have a complication, but nothing is actually happening and there's no real emergency. But because you are high risk, they're trying to push induction. Sometimes they push induction just because the weekend is coming up. Sometimes they push it because a holiday is coming up. Because spring break is just around the corner, I guarantee there are going to be doctors out there, probably parents, who are going to try to push their clients into induction before they go on their vacations. Biggest induction seasons that I can tell you right now are just around the holidays for Christmas. So anywhere from October all the way into early January. And then the next one is around the end of June through to September. These are the two biggest areas where there's like the highest induction rate. And in fact, when I was studying perinatal services BC and looking at the stats, what I found was shocking. There were two sections of each year where there was a higher induction rate and a higher cesarean rate every single year. And it was in the summer and it was in the winter. And it had nothing to do with our population demographics. It had nothing to do with whether women were older, fatter, or less healthy. In fact, we had a very healthy population of women giving birth before 35. And still, this induction rate rose. And then I looked at the local hospital statistics, and I noticed that even though we had very similar populations in the demographic area, and we had a well-educated and well-off population, very affluent, especially in Vancouver, that in certain hospitals, there was a higher induction rate, which then correlated to a higher cesarean rate. In fact, if you go and check out your local hospital, you can also see this. Go and check it out. Go into the website for your local area, or you can even call up your medical health authority and say, I would like this information. I would like to see the cesarean rates and the induction rates for whichever area you are in. Legally, you are allowed to have that. They may ask you why you want it, but legally you can have that. You can get access to that. And it may take you a while because they really like to gatekeep that information. And then you have to ask why that is. Why is it that they're gatekeeping this information? Another thing about induction that you really need to know, and this is another thing that I dug up, is that the Society of Obstetricians and Gynecologists of Canada had printed out something on the guidelines for induction of labor. And they stated that a first-time mom having an induction when her body is not ready has 3 times as likely a chance of having a cesarean than if their body is favorable and they're a second or third time mom. So just being a first-time mom, if you go and have an induction, you are 3 times more at risk of having a C-section. Why? Because induction does not necessarily mean that your baby is ready to come. If you are being induced, you're trying to force your baby out before they are ready, and this can lead to more problems. I don't have time to get into all of it, but I do have other videos. You can go to my YouTube channel. You can check out my other videos in the series for induction, and I talk about this quite a lot, about the risks of induction. And then in addition to that, if you really want to know the science, why induction matters, my copy is a little beaten because it was in a house fire, will help you as well. Why Induction Matters by Rachel Reed breaks down the science of induction. The other one, The Thinking Woman's Guide to a Better Birth, also breaks down the actual statistical evidence and allows you to see how these interventions play out. So, bottom line though, is that if you are choosing to induce your labor for whatever reason, you are more likely to have a C-section as a result. Because baby could go into distress or baby could get stuck. And because you're interfering with the physiological process, it's just so much more likely that you're going to have to also plan ahead for a C-section. This is why if my clients are thinking that they may need to be induced, I also make sure that they have a backup plan for a cesarean, and to have it be the most empowered, gentle, family-centered cesarean so that they can go in feeling confident and be like, you know what, I chose induction. It ended in a C-section, but I have no regrets. That is basically the empowered birth philosophy, is that we aim for a physiological birth. And if at any time you are not able to do that, if there's a complication that comes up or something comes up and you're like, you know, it's just not right for me anymore, I need to do the medical intervention, then at least you are going in with your eyes wide open and you know where things are going. Whereas if you just follow the typical medical path for birth, what's going to happen is you're going to get blindsided. You're going to fall into a trap. So aiming for physiological birth and then pulling back if we need to have those medical interventions, but knowing the risks, the benefits, the alternatives, and having your plan in place. Okay, so that leads me to the next thing, epidural. So with induction, labor is going to be more painful. And when you have an interventive style birth, where the medical system is really trying to control things, that can also lead to more pain. More pain means that you can't relax, which means you're more likely to ask for the epidural. Studies have also shown, and you can see this in statistics for local hospitals, that the higher the epidural rate usually correlates to a higher rate of labor augmentation, which is when they try to speed your labor up with Pitocin, or they break your waters, or interventions such as induction, or strapping you to the monitor, or expecting you to have an IV, and frequent vaginal exams. These all will lead to more pain in your birth than if you are having a physiological birth that is mostly hands-off or completely hands-off, and then you don't really feel that you need the epidural. So the high epidural use also, if you're looking at that in local hospital statistics, when you're researching where to go for your birth, if pretty much everybody in that hospital is having an epidural, you probably don't want to go with that care provider and that hospital. If that care provider says, well, we do our own epidurals, and they treat it like a selling point, chances are every single one of their clients has the epidural. Now, why don't you want the epidural though? Well, besides the fact that this leads to more C-sections, I'm going to explain why it leads to more C-sections. Because a lot of anesthesiologists will put out articles in mainstream education that will say that the epidural does not lead to more C-sections. And they try to cite all of their evidence for that. However, they're missing a really big piece here. And that is that the epidural affects the physiological birth process. When you have an epidural, what it does is it blocks your body's ability to produce its own oxytocin, which stimulates contractions. It also blocks the biofeedback from your baby to your uterus to your brain to signal for more endorphin release. So once you have that epidural, you're no longer running on your own endorphins. You're no longer running on oxytocin. The risks of an epidural can also be that your blood pressure drops. Or what can happen is your contractions slow down. And when your contractions slow down, the response of the medical system is automatically to get things going again. So then they put in Pitocin. And you can't feel the Pitocin because you're on the epidural, which is fine for you. But now your baby is going into distress because those contractions are too strong for your baby. Or they break your waters too. And then when they're breaking your waters, what that is doing is it's taking away the cushion of fluid for your baby to turn. Because you're having an epidural, you also are not going to be able to get into the right positions to be able to move your baby through your pelvis, which allows your baby to not be able to navigate properly. They're not able to get into position. They get stuck. And suddenly you're on your way to a C-section. The other alternative, though, if you don't get a C-section, this is what anesthesiologists will say. It's like, oh, well, not everybody gets a C-section. We did the epidural right. But you're going to also have a more interventive birth, which means that your vaginal birth is not going to be with your own physiological process with the less likelihood of you tearing, but instead you're not going to be able to feel yourself when you need to slow down and pushing, and you're going to tear more. You're also possibly going to get an episiotomy, which is they're going to cut the perineum and make the vaginal opening bigger, which is also not evidence-based, by the way, but a lot of people, they still are practicing this and it's a problem. Or they're going to use a vacuum or forceps delivery to pull your baby out, which is going to affect your pelvic floor and it's going to affect your recovery. And also, if you're trying to breastfeed your baby, it's going to be really uncomfortable for you to sit up because now you have more stitches and more pain after that birth. Sure, you were able to numb yourself out with the epidural, but afterwards you still have a longer recovery and you're just going to be sore for weeks. As opposed to with the physiological birth, when you're going with your instincts and you're following what your body needs and you're making those endorphins yourself, and then you're able to navigate that natural birth process. And I do talk more on the epidural. You can go through my YouTube channel and find those videos as well. I believe I've talked about that last spring. So again, this is a big problem, is induction and epidural use. But one of the big traps that so many moms fall into, the one that basically encompasses everything that I've talked about in the cesarean traps, the induction traps, the labor traps, the labor traps is this. So you're buying into a cultural narrative here, and it's not your fault. Buying into this cultural narrative and following the same advice that has been sent out in the mom groups, in the books, in the classes, what your care provider is saying, unfortunately, it has two really common elements and themes in it. Your body is broken and defective, and don't trust yourself, trust the experts. When you have that mentality, what this does is that no matter what information you get, no matter how many times you learn that something is a trap, you can't help but fall into it. And when you do this, what happens is that you go to your 39-week appointment, your care provider says, we need to induce. You know, instinctively, you don't want to induce. You also know from the evidence that induction is not necessary. You also know that induction leads to a C-section. So you're really trying to avoid it. But your care provider is trying to push you in this direction. And they're trying to scare you into believing that this is the best option. Sometimes they're not doing it on purpose. They're not trying to scare you on purpose. Sometimes this is just what they've been taught and what they're seeing. Because the other side of this is that because physiological birth is so rare in a hospital setting, it's not done, it's not convenient, it's not profitable, it's not what the medical model was built for. Because they don't see it and all they see is disaster, they are afraid. And the only way they know how to avoid the disastrous outcome that they think is going to happen if you say no is by continuing to tell you why this is necessary until you suddenly give in. So informed consent is supposed to be that they inform you and then you choose to consent or decline. That's what it's supposed to be. But because we have this culture of fear, and because we have a maternity care system that was literally built with misogyny and the idea that our bodies are defective and broken and that the medical system knows all and that women need to just be told what to do, like you have to understand, the maternity care system was built before we had our rights. The maternity care system was built before we were even seen as autonomous people who could actually tune into our own instincts. And a lot of what was taught in physiological birth, what we saw from our mothers and our sisters and our aunts and our grandmothers, even as they were giving birth, was lost when birth moved into the hospitals and out of the home. So now we have a culture where you're trying to get information from the mainstream sources that you've always been told to go to, like going to the childbirth classes taught by your health care provider or by the local nurse from that hospital. Reading the typical books and following the advice of medical professionals without questioning it, without recognizing that birth is a physiological process. And what this does is this automatically sets you up to fail from the moment you pee on the stick and start following that typical advice. And our society perpetuates this. And you see this in the mom groups. You see this in how so many people are like, you know, I did all of the things. I went to the classes, I tried to educate myself, and in the end, this is still what happened. So obviously birth must be unpredictable and I can't plan for everything. And it's probably because I wasn't healthy enough. So now I'm going to get more healthy. And now I'm going to really work on things. And I'm going to make sure that I'm doing all the exercises. I'm going to make sure that I'm eating right. But even if you're eating right and exercising, I'm just going to say that if you don't see the traps coming, you can still end up with a C-section. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how healthy you are. It doesn't matter how educated you are. It doesn't matter how much money you make. It doesn't matter that you went and hired the best doctor out there in the state or in the province. What matters is that you have to recognize and pull behind the curtain and see what's really going on here. Is that this is a cultural and this is a societal epidemic where 1 in 3 moms are having a C-section. 45% of moms that are reporting, it's probably a lot higher, but the ones that are reporting it are reporting birth trauma and disrespect and abuse in their childbirth experience. We have a very high induction rate as well. It's getting higher than 50% now, where pretty much everybody is trying to avoid an induction. In fact, I recently spoke to someone who is in the UK, and the UK used to be a guideline for our North American maternity care, because I would look at the UK stats and then I would look at what was happening over here in North America. And I'd be like, you know, the UK, they seem to have more of a support for physiological birth. They don't push induction until 42 weeks, whereas here induction can be pushed as early as 39 weeks. And the other thing is that they do have that informed consent. They also had a higher rate of midwife care, and they had a higher rate of home birth. Unfortunately, now the NHS in the UK is having problems. They are having difficulties. In fact, the midwives are really struggling to keep their rights when they're serving their clients, because the medical boards over there are now trying to put these restrictions on these midwives, which is a real problem. And you can learn more about that if you follow Rachel Reed. Reclaiming Childbirth as a Rite of Passage is one of her books, and Why Induction Matters is the other one. But start paying attention to what's happening over there too. If you're not in the UK, you weren't aware of this. But in the UK, what's happening is that they used to have all these rights and ability to have this physiological birth. Something is happening right now within the medical system, possibly staffing shortages, possibly there's a lot of high stress, and the response is to contain birth and say, no, you can no longer have a home birth. We're not going to send midwives out in this area anymore. And now moms are being pushed into the hospital, and they're seeing higher rates of cesarean and induction because of it. So if you want to see where things are going, all you have to do, if you're in the UK, is come look over here and what's happening in the US and in Canada. And if you're in US and Canada, what you want to see, if you want to know what's possible for us to move away from this highly controlled situation with medical care, maternity care, and being able to get your rights, go look at what has been in the UK. So the thing is, though, is that it's really, really hard to fight for what you want, because we have this culture of fear and it's perpetuated everywhere. I have found that you need to have 5 things optimized in order to get out of it. Basically, to get out of your fear, to be able to have the confidence to advocate for yourself, be able to have the education and not get scared, because you actually can hear what they're saying. And they'll say, oh, well, you know, the rate of stillbirth doubles after 41 weeks. So that's why we want you to induce. And instead of taking that at face value, you actually know the information. And you're like, yeah, I know how to ask the right questions to get the real answers here and figure out what the actual risk is. And that is my 5-pillar empowered birth system, which again, you can get the whole thing on my website, empoweringmomsbirth.com/book. And what this book does is it teaches you how to start asking the right questions so that you can get the 5-pillar system of the right mindset, the right education, the right environment, the right facilitators, and the right support. Again, empoweringmomsbirth.com/book. If you don't have this yet, I'm telling you right now, this is the best roadmap to allow you to avoid a cesarean that you don't want, avoid getting pressured into an induction, avoid getting pressured into a more painful birth in the medical system, and to be able to have that confidence to birth your baby completely naturally anywhere. That means if your baby comes fast in the car, you've got this. If your baby comes fast at home, you've got this. If you're planning a home birth and your midwife is not able to attend you right away, or they say to you, well, we are not able to get to you, so you have to come to the hospital, you can choose to either go or stay and have them still come to you. You've got this. If you are choosing to have a hospital birth, you can still have a completely hands-off, unassisted vaginal birth, even if you've had a C-section and even if you are considered high risk. You've got this. This system works so effectively. It's so powerful. The system is so effective that it worked for a mom who was 41 years old. She'd had previous preeclampsia with her first. She had a previous C-section. She'd been tricked into an induction with her first because she had high blood pressure. She was high risk. She had gestational diabetes and chronic high blood pressure with her second baby. She was in a health authority where we don't do VBAC. It's very, very heavily controlled. There is no such thing as physiological birth in our healthcare. Like, they basically want to control everything. And this is the same area that I was in where I learned how to navigate that and still have my physiological birth. and she was able to do it completely unassisted. When she came into the hospital, she was already 1 hour away from birthing her baby, and she was already very confident that she could do it. But the nurse wanted to do a vaginal exam, and she said no. And the nurse said, well, if you don't let me do a vaginal exam, I can't call the doctor. And the doula is like, you need to call the doctor, like this baby's coming. But the nurse would not listen. But because my friend Jenny, this is the one who went through this system, because she was so confident in her body and had the empowered birth system, this roadmap, she was able to be like, okay, that's fine. You're not calling a doctor. I can catch this baby myself, or my partner and my doula can catch this baby. And that is exactly what happened. The nurse went off finally. She's like, oh, maybe I should call the doctor. And Jenny birthed her baby, a completely unassisted vaginal birth after cesarean with a high-risk mom. That is how powerful this system is. And again, all you have to do is go to empoweringmomsbirth.com/book. The fact is that I just want to get this information out there as fast as possible, because what is happening in this medical system, it's just going to keep getting worse. If we continue to go down this path of following the rules that the medical system has put out for maternity care, and we don't start questioning things, we don't know how to ask the right questions, we don't know how to advocate for ourselves, we don't know how to get past our fear, we don't have the right education about physiological birth to keep us from falling into those traps, what's going to happen is that those restrictions are just going to keep shrinking. There was a time when everybody was getting induced at 41 weeks, and now you're seeing 39 weeks. And vaginal exams are happening at 36 weeks. We're going backwards. We're going to a heavily controlled model of birth that's going to lead to an even higher C-section rate than we already have. So again, as my empowered birth community, here's what I would like from you. I would like you to reach out to me in whatever form you need to. If it's leaving it in the comments, if it's putting it into a post, if it's commenting directly to me by sending me a messenger, you can just DM me. You can send me an email, carly@empoweringmomsbirth.com. Whatever form you need, this is what's going to help you the most. I'm just going to stretch my legs out a little. They were cramped. So the thing is that I really draw from what you are telling me in your experiences, because I really do want to help you. I really do want you to get that empowered birth. And I know that this is not getting out there to everyone. So I'm also going to invite you to start inviting people to this group and start telling them about what's in this community and about the information and the support and the education that you're going to get here, because we really have to turn this around. I said it at the beginning of the year. I am committed to making 2023 the year of empowered birth. And I stand by that 110%. And I know that this system works because I've tested it with my high-level coaching clients. I've gone through it myself. I've taught other people how to do this even at the lower level, and they are also getting empowered births. So this system, again, you can get the entire thing if you get my book, Your Empowered Birth, which you can get at my website, empoweringmomsbirth.com/book. This will give you the roadmap. All right, I'll talk to you soon. Bye.